Hi, welcome to Season 2 of my podcast, All About Her. I'm your host, Shreya Anand, and I'm a high schooler interested in STEM. Join me as I speak to various women in STEM to learn all about her experiences and advice for girls like me. Today I'll be speaking to a woman who is a clinical research senior scientific director and associate professor of neurosurgery at Stanford University. Not only do we talk about her experiences and her advice, though, we also go into detail about how the pandemic has really affected her work and her ability to conduct clinical trials that she normally does in her research. And so we really talk about the whole scientific process and being able to overcome challenges, especially in a time as trying as this. So without further ado, I hope you guys really enjoy today's interview with Dr.Maheen Adamson, and let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Adamson. Would you mind just quickly introducing your career and what you currently specialize in?
Thank you for inviting me for this podcast. I'm excited to be part of it. I am currently the Director of Research at the Rehab Service, including the Headache Center for Excellence at the VA Palo Alto. I'm also Clinical Associate Professor in Neurosurgery affiliated, and I am a neuroscientist by profession. And I have a PhD in neuroscience that was done years ago. I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford in psychiatry, and then just continued to work in those two spheres. Currently, my research is, four-pronged. I have clinical trials that I'm running for neuromodulation, which is basically brain stimulation that provides a treatment for depression, pain, cognitive problems in patients with traumatic brain injury. I'm also looking at cognitive aging, Alzheimer's disease, and other comorbidities that happen in a lot of patients that I see. A lot of my patients are veterans. I also work with civilians as well. I have several focus on my research. One is looking at traumatic brain injuries, specifically in relationship to gender. I also look at other non-invasive therapies for these difficult problems that brain injury patients face, including virtual reality treatments. I also am involved in epidemiological studies, and one of the other things that I'm looking into is neurological impact of COVID-19 in older adults, as well as people who have recovered from it in terms of long COVID, or what is being termed as post-acute sequelae of COVID-19. So those are some of the things that I am involved in.
That is absolutely incredible. The list goes on, and I think that what you're working on is honestly so inspirational. But before we actually get into, asking you about more specifics on that, let's get into the fun section. So 3 main questions. The first one is, what is your favorite fun fact about the brain?
The favorite fun fact about the brain, it's that it's a greedy little organ. It is. It's very greedy. It uses a lot of your glucose that you take in every day. So it takes up a lot of the energy that you eat and get. The brain uses it up. It has a very high potential, at least in me, to be very emotionally driven. It is also very prone to being addicted. It falls asleep very quickly. It gets bored quickly. So if you understand how your brain works, you can tap into ways to focus it. Like, one of the ways to do this is I was just talking to somebody earlier, is instead of having the old school way of teaching people with like hours and hours of teaching tutorials, break it up into small chunks, and then you will have a better time focusing and understanding. So yeah, I gave you a few fun facts about the brain. And one of the other things that I love about the brain is that it's a universe within us. And it is an incredible organ because there's no other organ that I know in the human body that you can stimulate and it can change the way you behave, the way you think, and the way you dream.
Wow. Greedy organ. Nice. Okay, next one. What is your favorite movie?
Oh boy. I have several genres. I am a big sci-fi person. I know that I might not look like it, but the old Blade Runner used to be my favorite. Love the way that they showed the future world in it. Very much into the Harrison Ford old Blade Runner movie.
And last question, what is something new that you've done over the quarantine time?
This is completely off the topic, but I bought an in-home facial steamer.
Nice.
So I can steam my face at home without going for a facial, because even when you go to a facial now, they don't steam your face. So I bought a steamer and I'm really enjoying it. So.
Self-care is very important. Yes.
It's very important, yes.
All right. Thank you so much for answering those questions. Let's get into actually about you, your career, and everything like that. So, something that I always like to ask the women that I interview is, did you ever really see yourself in this position when you were younger, studying neuroscience or neurosurgery or anything like that?
The quick and fast answer is absolutely not. I grew up in Pakistan, and I came to the U.S. at 19. I was only daughter, 3 brothers. My father was a very extremely important figure in my life. Very motivating. Very doted me with a lot of attention. Allowed me to explore a lot of things that a lot of women in those days were not allowed to do. I was always one of those people who wanted to try new things. I was always very good in school, but I was also interested in doing fun things. Like I learned French, and when I was I think 18 in Pakistan, I went to the institute and learned French. Then I did German just for fun. I did interior design because I wanted to try it. And when I came to the U.S., I was very much taken by Harrison Ford, I guess. I wanted to be an anthropologist. And, with all the Indiana Jones movies. And I think that I took for the first semester, I took world history, anthropology, archaeology, and it took only about 6 months for me to realize that biology and chemistry is where my heart is. So I switched to that. But at the same time, when I was going to school in Pakistan, like I said, I was a science. In those days, you had to choose. You either were a business accounting person or a science person. So I chose to be in the science area in my 9th, 10th, 11th. I did my O-levels and A-levels, ordinary levels and advanced levels through Cambridge University in England. And it was really interesting because at that point I did not want to be an MD. I don't remember thinking about being an MD. A lot of my friends were applying to really good medical schools in Pakistan, and I didn't even think about that. I just wanted to I wanted to study. I wanted to investigate. But I didn't know about research papers. I meet high schoolers now and they want to be on research papers. When I was in high school, I didn't even know what a research paper was. This is back in 1990s. And so when I came to the US and I was at UC Irvine, I went to a community college for 2 years and took all of my courses there, and then moved to UC Irvine. And UC Irvine is a very highly scientifically oriented school. They're famous for chemistry, biology, physics, math, computer science. And I started taking these courses, and around that time, I was like, hey, why don't I just see what research is like? And my schooling, my academic path has been very, very scientifically oriented, very academic, very full on, like basic neuroscience. So when I was a junior, not even a sophomore, I actually got into a lab at UC Irvine, quite a famous lab, Weinberger lab, which was about auditory plasticity. So it was about the fact that you could, this is crucial. This is the first time that I learned that you could actually change the way brain behaves by stimulating it. So we were obviously doing this in rats. So I was working with rats, and the idea was to train them. It was peer conditioning, but then see how their responses in the auditory cortex changes according to how we train them. But it was almost, I'm not saying it was like a godlike experience, but it was more like really understanding that, hey, I can actually change the way an animal behaves by training it, but not just by by looking at the behavior, but actually looking at the changes in the evoked potentials in the auditory cortex. And it was a revelation to me, literally. And it's a little late in the game, to be honest. I mean, it was I was a sophomore in college, like, ooh, you could do that to the brain. And then I, around that time, decided that, oh, maybe I should go be an MD. And I started taking some MCAT classes, and I got bored. I was like, this is boring. I'm like, you just have to memorize stuff. Then I took my GRE, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to grad school. And I stayed one more year after I finished my undergrad. I did my undergrad in neurobiology and also in women's studies. So I did 2 undergrads. It was really interesting because you had to cross campus to go to humanities. And I was learning all these biological models that I could apply to gender differences and, things like that. It was an interesting time. I still haven't found any answers, which is telling. But anyway, so I decided to go for grad school, and grad school was amazing because I got into USC. I also got into UCLA, but I chose USC because I wanted to work with humans, and the lab at UCLA that accepted me was working with animals. I got into USC, and I had the best 5 years that you can imagine for neuroscience PhD. It is an excellent school, and it was just, I worked with some amazing mentors there and really got into basics of cognitive and molecular neuroscience, like what really happens to the brain. And this is before neuroscience became like a big deal. Like in those days when I would tell people I'm a neuroscience PhD, they would say, oh my God, can you read my mind? Can you tell me can you interpret my dream? I mean, there was no, and I've noticed in the past 5 to 8 years, neuroscience has become like, wow, that's a really cool field. And in those days, I was like, are you a nerd? Can you talk to people? Is there something wrong with you? Are you socially apt? And I'm a very social person. So people would be shocked that I'm doing something so hardcore, right? And it was a great experience. And then from the PhD, during this time, I have to say, I was married, and then I was actually married when I was an undergrad. I got married very early, but when I was doing my dissertation, I had my son, and it was difficult. It was in those days, I didn't have any help. There was, U.S. doesn't really have a maternity leave. I walked with him in my arms. He was 6 months old. And so I took about a year. I didn't take it off. I was teaching a class at Cal State Fullerton. I worked as a research associate at UCLA while I was looking for a postdoc. Then I moved from LA to Stanford when I got this postdoc with another amazing mentor in psychiatry department at the VA Palo Alto, as well as at Stanford. And just started learning a lot. And in those, I really didn't get into clinical translational research until I would say 2010 or 2011, because until then, I finished my postdoc in 2008. And then I was one of the lucky ones to get into a job straight away that would pay for me to do data analysis. I became director of data core for a center that was funded by the VA National Office. Very important center because it looked at complex diseases that veterans have. And what was really interesting is it really brought all my neuroscience knowledge of data and understanding of the brain all together into what disease looks like. And I was flabbergasted. There's no other way. I mean, I'm used to looking at, one disease, you're looking at Alzheimer's disease, or you're looking at college students and there's no other comorbidities and everything's clean and it's an experiment and you're a neuroscientist. You get into the clinical world, you're like, holy, this is like completely different. So started learning, getting really good mentorship, connecting with people, and really understanding that what my knowledge is just the tip of the iceberg. And if you want to make it if you want to translate your knowledge into the clinical realm or help people, you have to work in a team. And you have to learn how to manage teams. You have to learn about how to address the needs of the patient. And you have to always think about the patient. Like, I would love to just study, like, I don't know, facials, like how does skincare work? Or I would like to study how the toe is formed. But there's no need for it. So you see what I mean? It's like really understanding what the need is. So I hope I answered your question. So it's a gradual process. The point is that you always go back to what your basics were. Like, I went back to how I loved biology and how I loved chemistry, and I wavered from it for a while, but I always came back to it. So you have to understand like your core, but I know the audience is high schoolers, and so I want to make sure that your core is understood a little later. So, but you do have to continue to feed it.
That's absolutely incredible. I like you said, neuroscience is gaining a lot of popularity recently because people are kind of, I think, realizing what you just said. It's like this beautiful intersection between chemistry, biology, clinical trials, and then you also get like the psychology part of it as well. And I think that's something that's really important to realize in science as a whole. So I guess talking a little bit more specifically on the work that you're currently doing with regards to COVID-19, how exactly, what exactly is your role there in understanding how COVID-19 has affected patients?
So it's all a blur now, right? So I'm sure everybody's life is a blur during the pandemic, but as a scientist and as a mother, the impact of COVID was such that, of course, my kids were getting homeschooled at home, with the Zoom and everything. Things were changing constantly, but what is important to note that as a research scientist, when you run clinical trials, our research was shut down. So we had to really figure out how to make things work. When you can't test patients, it's shut down, right? But I have a lot of projects, and I have a lot of data, and I have a nice team. I have a big lab. And so we were able to do a lot of work during the pandemic. One of the first things we did was in March, we said, I had this thought while usually I'm in the shower when I'm thinking about these things. I felt so much stress that it was overwhelming. And I realized that a lot of women across the world are feeling the same stress. So in March, I decided to do a survey, an international survey, to look at a standardized measure of stress across the world to see how people respond. So we were able to collect data with my lab internationally, completely anonymized, approved, but we were able to do it in the first month of quarantine. so March to April. And then we were able to look at the stress levels in which women, actually younger women, came out to be the highest, the most salient population that has the most stress. Older adults over the age of 75 reported less stress. We were able to collect 1,400 something samples across the world in that month. And we were able to show these trends, and a lot of other people were doing surveys like that. But we were able to publish it. And I've never published a study from March to December. I'm a neuroscientist. It takes me 2 years to collect data. But here, because it was a survey, we were able to analyze and publish, and it was quite interesting. We were able to report on 11 countries. Germany, Mexico, and Pakistan came out to be, at that time, lower stress. And I was able to comment on why that is. Healthcare reforms or healthcare policies, health policies in each of the countries, how that helps. So that aspect of COVID, I had a pretty good handle on. During this time, I also am a member of a very large international consortium that goes by the name of ENIGMA. It stands for Enhancing Neuroimaging Genetics Meta-Analysis. So that International Brain and Genetics Consortium, it's a very large consortium, and it's built of international experts on brain imaging and genetics. The head of that person, the founder of that, is Dr. Paul Thompson. He's at USC. And I was part of this group, and they had a group called COVID-19 Working Group. So the whole consortium is based on different working groups. And I was part of a military brain imaging working group. I was part of the fMRI working group. And it's just a really wonderful way of collaborating with people, joining hands in data collection and data analysis, publishing guidelines for neuroimaging, and developing new innovative methods. I became part of that COVID-19 working group, and we started talking about how, at that point, this is in April of last year, before anyone knew what long COVID was. I'm not kidding. We were like, okay, this is inflammatory. I remember running downstairs to my husband when I first read the article in February. I think it was Nature saying, and I'm like screaming. I'm like, it's getting into the brain. It's getting into the brain. I mean, I couldn't sleep at night. The neuroscientist in me was like, holy, this is crazy. I mean, it takes a virus some time to get to the brain, right? People thought, oh, this is a new virus. Yes, it's a new virus, but there's a lot of other viruses that have happened. Like, scientists are not working with a complete, empty, clean blackboard. We've had a lot of viruses before, and we have had, infectious disease doctors and Dr. Fauci. I mean, these people have a lot of experience. They know what they're talking about. But when you look at other viruses and the way there was all this talk about how it's going through the nose into the olfactory system, it's getting to the brain. There was talk about, and I think that has not been shown to happen, if I'm correct, by some data in Mount Sinai. And it was really interesting because there was all this happening, like in New York Times, Washington Post, Nature, Lancet, everyone's going nuts on like the issue at that time was all the data that we were seeing was either from older people and also from people who were sick enough to get to the hospital, not from people who recovered with mild and moderate COVID, and also not younger, because nobody was allowed to go to the hospital unless you were really sick. Also, the people that we were getting data from, they already had so much of the pulmonary problems that once you get to that level, whatever's happening in the brain is overpowered by what's happening to the rest of the body. So you can't really look at like distinct inflammatory responses that are having neurological symptoms, right? So we started thinking about writing grants. We started thinking about figure out hypotheses how we could look at effects of neurologic, because we knew that if this is happening to people, this is going to affect dementia, this is going to affect Alzheimer's, this is going to affect cognitive aging, this is going to affect, the other things like, other symptoms and chronic fatigue syndrome, things like that. We started writing grants, and we've been writing grants since then. So we've developed a really nice consortium, and we are hoping that our hypotheses are accepted by, leadership. And we are currently actually doing a study on assessing cognitive changes in people who have had COVID, but we're conducting it over the telephone. So we're conducting a cognitive battery. So there's a lot of, it's just been a really interesting time. And one of the other things that we're really focused on in this COVID, in the COVID studies and trying to understand what neurological symptoms of COVID are, is that it's really highlighted where help is needed. So the term social determinants of health, trying to address health disparities, healthcare disparities, reaching out to other racial and ethnic groups that are low social economic status. We've known about this for years. I mean, the Framingham Heart Study really highlighted it. But, it didn't impact the world the way it did now. So our whole way of recruiting patients and analyzing data, it's coming in from a different lens now. And it's coming in with an urgency that we've never had before. So that's the answer to your question.
So I guess kind of last question based off of all of this, I've learned a lot from you, but maybe just if you have a little piece of advice or something like that you really think has helped you throughout your entire career and your education that you want to share with other people that might be interested in getting into neuroscience.
It's hard. It's very, very, very hard. You're going to have to give up a lot of social stuff, and, your friends might be going for spring break and you might be wanting to party a lot, but you're going to have to work hard. The most important thing that I would say is people think that they work hard during their graduate school and they work hard in their PhD, and they think that that's PhD is it. I can say that what I learned in 5 years of PhD is probably 5% of what I know now. The work never stops. The learning should never stop. And your motivation is to be better yourself. And you should always know that you have to ask questions, because you're studying the human brain. You cannot know all the answers, and you have to reach out and be humble and say, I don't know the answer. I'm going to reach out to a physicist. I'm going to reach out to a computer scientist because I don't know the answer, and I'm going to get the answer, and I'm going to provide them with the credit that's needed. Building teams is important in this day, in this age. Building teams is very important. Building diverse teams is very important. So like-minded people, 10 years ago, all I talked to was neurologists and neuroscientists. Now infectious disease and psychologists and social workers are my best friends. So make sure that your team is diverse. Make sure that you are able to get knowledge from different resources. There are a lot of obstacles that are going to make you feel like you are worth nothing, and you're going to get reviews that are bad for grants and papers. People are going to say, what are you doing? This is stupid. 10,000 people are doing this. Your goal is to find a space for yourself. With all the information that you have, you're a unique person. You're an individual person, and the way you think, the way you identify a need based on your personal experience is very different from how I would identify it. So you need to find that, and you need to stick with it and work on it, because it's easy to get sidetracked and it's easy to be overcommitted, and I'm overcommitted. But the point is, you have to really get up in the morning and get at it. And I'm not very good at it sometimes. I'm like, okay, I'm going to sleep. I can't work today. I'm overworked and I'm burned out. You get 1, maybe 2 days of Netflix binging. That's it. You get a bad review on a grant, you get a bad grade, you get a bad review or something, binge on Netflix for a day. After that, get back to work. There's no question. Hard, because we're in Silicon Valley. Everybody is smart. Everyone is smart. Smart doesn't cut it anymore. What works is if you work hard and if you're motivated. Because if you're nice, you have to be kind, you have to be nice, because you can't build teams on fear. You can't build teams on like, you will do this for me, because people will do 75% of the weight of what they are doing. But if they love you and if they care for you and if they know that you are watching out for them as a team member, they will do 100% job. So those are some of the advice that I give to people.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with me today, Dr. Adamson. I really appreciate, everything that you've taught me in this very short amount of time.
You're very welcome.
I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I really enjoyed learning about this new perspective to neuroscience that was not only so focused on, I guess, just studying the brain, but also showing how it can involve so much more than that, and especially Dr. Adamson's adaptations in her lab and her research to the pandemic and how she's able to deal with those situations. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below, and be sure to check out Dr. Adamson's LinkedIn, which will also be down below as well. And follow me for Instagram for more updates on the show. Again, I'm posting every single week twice, once with Wholesome Wednesday and once with our normal podcast, so be sure to go ahead and check those out as usual. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay strong, and stay snazzy. Happy 4th of July!